Welcome to the Pod-Key summary of 2007-08 Arsenal F.C. season. This was one of those Arsenal seasons that still feels a little hard to pin down. It had a real sense of renewal after Thierry Henry's exit, a young team playing brilliant football, and a title race that looked winnable for a long stretch, but it still ended without silverware. What makes it memorable is the tension in it. Arsenal were exciting, productive, and often excellent. Yet the season also exposed how fragile a talented young side can be when injuries hit, and the big moments start stacking up. The backdrop to all of this was a genuine turning point for the club. Henry was sold to Barcelona for a reported £16 million, and it happened in a moment of uncertainty, with David Dine gone and Arsene Wenger's own future still hanging in the air. So this wasn't just a transfer. It felt like the end of one Arsenal era and the awkward beginning of another. Right as the club was still settling into life after Highbury and into the Emirates years. And it wasn't only Henry leaving. Freddie Ljungberg and Jose Antonio Reyes also moved on, which meant even more of the old attacking identity was being cleared out at once. What's striking is that the team didn't crumble. Wenger's younger side still put up 83 Premier League points, which is the highest total ever recorded by a team finishing third in the 38-game format. That tells you a lot about the level here. This wasn't some decent rebuilding year dressed up after the fact. It was a very good side, doing very serious work. For a huge chunk of the season, Arsenal looked like they might actually pull this off. They led the league for roughly two-thirds of the campaign and had opened up a 5-point lead by February. Then came the moment that changed the mood of the whole season. Eduardo suffered a career-threatening broken leg against Birmingham City, and from there Arsenal hit 4 straight league draws. It's tempting to reduce that collapse to nerves or lost momentum, but that doesn't really cover it. The injury was massive. The squad was taking on more defensive strain, and the emotional effect on a young team was obvious. Later defeats to Chelsea and Manchester United finished the damage. Arsenal ended third 4 points behind United, despite putting together a 24 wins, 3 losses, 11 draws record. That's the painful part. The season wasn't undone by being ordinary. It was undone by being just vulnerable enough at exactly the wrong time. One of the most interesting things about this Arsenal team is that it didn't replace Henry with another Henry. It replaced dependence on one superstar with a broader attack. Emmanuel Adebayor became the leading scorer with 30 goals in 48 appearances, including 24 in the league. He also managed hat-tricks against Derby County, both home and away, becoming the first player to do that in one Premier League season. But the bigger story is how spread out the scoring was. Arsenal had 16 different scorers, which really captures the shape of Wenger's post-Henry team. Cesc Fabregas was central to that creativity, and players like Robin van Persie and Eduardo added to it when available. It was younger, less predictable, and in some ways more collective than the old model. There's something very Wenger about that. Even after losing the club's record goal scorer, he still built an attack that felt alive and shared rather than lonely and dependent. That same faith in youth showed up in the League Cup. Wenger leaned hard into the reserve-heavy side, and at one point, Mark Hughes even compared them to Manchester United's celebrated young teams. Wenger believed those youngsters were good enough to win the competition, and for stretches you could see why people got excited. The talent was obvious, and the club's development pipeline looked unusually rich. But this was also where the risks of that strategy became impossible to ignore. Tottenham knocked Arsenal out 6-2 on aggregate in the semifinals, including a brutal 5-1 second-leg defeat. Wenger later admitted he regretted selecting players who should not have played, which is one of those comments that lands harder because he usually defended his decisions pretty firmly. So the youth project looked both admirable and unfinished. It could produce brilliance, but it could also leave the team exposed in a hurry. In the Champions League, Arsenal delivered one of their standout results of the era. They beat Milan 2-0 at San Siro, becoming the first English team to win there against Milan. That wasn't a lucky little smash-and-grab result either. It felt like proof that this young side could go into one of Europe's grand old stadiums and play with courage and quality. Then came Liverpool in the quarterfinals, and the story turned familiar again. Arsenal went out 5-3 on aggregate after a controversial penalty and a late goal at Anfield. Wenger disputed the officiating and pointed to defensive inexperience, and he pushed back on the idea that the defeat showed weak mentality. Looking at the season as a whole, that argument makes sense. The issue wasn't some simple lack of nerve. It was that Arsenal had a high ceiling, but in the biggest knockout moments, they were still a little too open, a little too young, and a little too vulnerable when the game got chaotic. In the end, Arsenal finished a third straight season without a trophy, their first trophyless 3-year run since 1997. On paper, that's the line that hurts, and it's the one critics always come back to. But the season is more complicated than that. They led the league for most of the campaign, went deeper in Europe than the year before, and produced some exceptional attacking football along the way. That's why this season keeps sticking in the memory. It captured the promise and the frustration of Wenger's project in the same breath. You had record-level league output for a third-place team, a fresh attacking identity after Henry, and real signs of a brilliant next generation. You also had injuries, decisive stumbles, and a team that couldn't quite turn control into silverware. Sometimes a season tells you a team is finished. This one told you Arsenal were very much alive, just not quite complete yet. So if you remember this campaign as both exciting and maddening, that's probably the correct memory. Arsenal were building something very real, and at the same time finding out how thin the line is between promise and prizes. It's one of those seasons that leaves you thinking they were close, and also that close in football can be an incredibly long distance. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.